I just saw Blossoms on their latest tour. Let's talk about that. Okay, so this is a bit of a new video that I'm trying for this channel. Well, I say that, I've only made one video on this channel so far, but I'm going to be experimenting with doing some of these concert or gig reviews when I've kind of finished, like when I come back from a gig, and I'm not going to probably do it for every gig, but when I've kind of got something to say or enough to say about the gig itself. Because the only other video I've had on this channel so far was ranking every Blossoms album, and I've just come back from seeing Blossoms last night at the time of recording at least, I thought it'd make sense to do one on this Blossoms gig that I've basically just come back from last night. But if you like this and you want to see more videos like this in the future, let me know in the comments down below. So before I get into specifically last night's gig, I first want to talk about the other Blossoms gigs that I've been to, because I have seen Blossoms before this point. So the first Blossoms gig I went to was in March 2020, just before lockdown. It was the last gig that I went to before lockdown happened and before all COVID was kind of kicking off massively. And so that was in March 2020 for the Foolish Loving Spaces tour at Rock City in Nottingham, which, by the way, after that gig, after that tour, I should say, Blossoms mentioned on the Blossoms Pubcast that that was the best gig they had during that Foolish Loving Spaces tour. So it was a great gig, and I'm glad they thought so too, because I personally had a really good time at that gig. It's one of the best gigs I've been to, and it's nice that it's not just one of those things where, you know, the band says whilst you're watching them live that this is like the best gig they've had of the whole tour, which you kind of like, oh, they probably say this to everybody. It was a case of, you know, after the fact, after the whole tour was over, they said it on the Pubcast, so that was nice. And yeah, I do agree, it was a very good gig at Rock City in Nottingham. Because that was the final gig I went to before lockdown, it does hold a very special place in my heart, and not only as well because Foolish Loving Spaces is my favourite Blossoms album, as you'll know from my album ranking video if you've seen that. So obviously a lot of the set for that particular gig was Foolish Loving Spaces stuff, so I really enjoyed that gig. The next time I saw Blossoms was at Leeds Fest a couple years ago. I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was like the first one back from COVID, I think. And that was a nice one because I wasn't even, when I bought tickets to that, Blossoms weren't meant to be going. They weren't part of the lineup for Leeds Fest that year. I initially bought tickets to go and see specifically Queens of the Stone Age, Charlie XCX, and 100 gecs. They were the main people that I was meant to be going to see, but unfortunately all three of them dropped out because Queens of the Stone Age and 100 gecs, they're from America, they're American artists, and so they couldn't make it because like there was still like travel restrictions and stuff like that, because obviously lockdown had pretty much like just been lifted or wasn't even fully lifted at that time, and things were only just opening up again. And a similar thing with Charlie XCX, I believe, even though she's British, I think she lives in America most of the time, so the same thing for her, she couldn't come to it either. So all three of the main acts that I was going to Leeds Fest for that year did cancel, which was really unfortunate. It was a bit of a bummer because that was like the main reason I was going in the first place. It was the first time I'd been to Leeds Fest, and I was only going for one day because all of those acts were meant to be performing on the same day. But it wasn't all downsides. I didn't need to try and refund my tickets if that was even possible at that point, because it was announced that Blossoms were replacing them, and Jerry Cinnamon was also there that day as well, but unfortunately I didn't get to see him that day because I was there with my girlfriend and she was not feeling great that day, so we had to go back. But luckily we saw Jerry Cinnamon. I think I'd already seen him at that point anyway. I think he was at Why Not or something like that, but I'd definitely seen him before at that point. And luckily as well, because my girlfriend hadn't seen him at that point, we saw him again later on in Sheffield at Sheffield Arena after that point, so we still got a chance to see Jerry Cinnamon anyway. But we did see Blossoms, which was nice, even if that was pretty much the only main thing we saw besides going to watch KSI from a distance just because we thought it'd be funny. And I actually got a little bit emotional watching Blossoms at Leeds, because Leeds Fest that year was one of like, I don't think it was the first gig that I'd done back from COVID, but it was one of the first gigs back from COVID. And as I mentioned earlier, the Blossoms gig at Nottingham that I went to was the last gig I went to before lockdown, so it was just kind of was a nice moment. It did make me start to tear up a little bit at that particular performance, just because of that kind of connection there. So those are the two previous times that I've seen Blossoms. I didn't go when they went on tour for Ribbon Around the Bomb because, as I mentioned in my album ranking video, Ribbon Around the Bomb was not one of my favorite albums from Blossoms. I wasn't that big of a fan of it, so I didn't really feel the need to go and see them if most of the songs they were playing were going to be from that album. But with the new album, Gary, like I've mentioned, it's one of my favorite Blossoms albums that they've got. I think I ranked it third place in my album ranking, and I do think it is a great album because it's got a very similar vibe to Foolish Loving Spaces, which, like I mentioned, is my favorite Blossoms album. So I pre-ordered the vinyl for this, the limited edition vinyl for this album, so that I could get pre-sale for this tour. And a little fun fact about that as well well, the limited edition vinyl that I've got, they accidentally forgot to put Nightclub in the track listing. It is on the actual vinyl itself, but they forgot to put it on the track listing on the back of the cover art of the vinyl itself, which is a fun little detail. It wasn't intentional, it wasn't meant to be like a secret track, they just forgot to do it accidentally, which is quite fun, but it does make that specific edition of the vinyl quite unique. But yeah, so we went to see them at Sheffield for this tour because that's where I'm based. Most of the gigs I used to go to in the past were in Nottingham at Rock City because that was kind of where I was kind of close to at the time, but I am now based in Sheffield because that's where I went to uni, so that's where I live now. So for this particular gig, they were at the Octagon, which is a building based in the University of Sheffield, where I actually graduated from the University of Sheffield. My thing's right there, so it was nice to go back there. But the reason that they went there instead, usually they would be going to the O2 Academy in Sheffield, but that is currently closed. I think it's temporarily closed because of concerns with the concrete. There was all this stuff going on in the UK about a particular type of concrete, I think, that was kind of unsafe, and I think most of O2 Academy in Sheffield is built out of that concrete, so I think it's permanently closed at the moment. I think, as far as I remember hearing, it might be being demolished at some point, but I'm not sure about that. But either way, it got moved to the Octagon in Sheffield instead of O2 Academy because of that. So when we happened to get there just before the support band, which was Red Rum Club. I've heard of Red Rum Club before. I think I've seen them on a few festival lineups and stuff like that, but I've never really listened to their music, so we weren't particularly interested in making sure we were there to see Red Rum Club. I don't mind going to see, support bands before a gig oftentimes. It's a nice way to get introduced to new artists and stuff like that, but for this particular gig, I was with a few other people and they also weren't really that bothered about going to see the support band for this particular gig, so we were planning on kind of showing up maybe like halfway through the support band or something like that, but we did end up getting there just before, and they started playing as we were ordering drinks at the bar. And so kind of throughout this time, whilst we were watching the support bands, we were kind of pretty much near the back. We were pretty much right at the back, actually. As the support came off and more people were kind of leaving or going to the toilet or whatever in between the break between the support and between Blossoms, some more space kind of freed up, so we like slowly kept kind of stepping forward to the point where before Blossoms came on, we were pretty much quite central in terms of the crowd. We were kind of near the middle there, which, is kind of what I tend to do with gigs now. I especially if it's bands that I've already seen before, a lot of the time I do tend to be kind of at the back, or I'll be at the back to begin with and then slowly creep forward. I don't tend to try and push through to the front anymore as much as I used to. I used to do that quite a lot. I remember there was one year that I went to see Catfish and the Bottlemen 3 times in one year. Those were the only times I've seen Catfish and the Bottlemen, but it was 3 times in one year, and pretty much every time there I was trying to get to the front the whole time, and those were like massive arena gigs and everything, so it was pretty crazy. But I don't tend to really do that as much anymore, especially if it's bands that I've already seen, unless sometimes I go to quite a lot of small gigs now that sometimes you're kind of near the front anyway because it's quite a small venue. So yeah, then Blossoms came on at about 9 o'clock, I think it was. I can't remember how on time they were, or I think they were a little bit late, but I'm not entirely sure. I can't really remember off the top of my head. So this is the set list for the particular gig that I went to last night. They opened with Your Girlfriend, which I believe is how they also opened with when I saw them for the other 2 gigs that I saw them at, because obviously Foolish Love in Spaces was out around that time. And I think this song is a really great way to open the set because the song itself opens with the cowbell before it gets straight into the song. And it always kind of reminds me as well as the same way that Don Broco often open their gigs now, who I've also seen a few times, where they tend to open with their song Pretty because that has a little sound bite at the start that says, Bedford, where's Bedford?
Bedford, where's Bedford? Come on.
And it's just kind of a nice way to kind of build up the crowd to know what's coming with just a very simple, short sound. And so I think that was a great way to open the set. And for this particular gig, I can't remember if he's done this in the past as well, but for this particular gig, Tom was kind of stood there holding a cowbell up really high and kind of building up to the, him about to hit the cowbell and stuff like that, which I thought was a really nice touch. Alternatively, though, I think it could have been very cool if, the lights were off completely and you just hear the cowbell, but I think that was also a really fun way to do it. We then go into Perfect Me, which was nice because that's one of my favorite songs off the new album as well. We then went into I Can't Stand It, which is also one of my favorite songs from their second album. They slowed it down a bit with Getaway, which is really nice. I'm glad that's one that's still kind of staying in the set because I'm pretty sure that's all the way from back in their first album, so it's nice that they've kind of kept that one around. We then got on to Oh No, I Think I'm in Love from Foolish Love in Spaces, which is actually one of the kind of few songs from Foolish Love in Spaces. There's not as many songs from Foolish Love in Spaces as I think I would have liked in this, but I think that is mostly because obviously this is kind of focused on the brand new album, so that's what makes up the majority of the set. We then get another couple of songs from the new album with What Can I Say After I'm Sorry, which is another one of my favorite songs from the new album. They also played Big Star, which is once again another one of my favorite songs from the new album, and I don't think I was actually expecting them to play play this, I had looked at some set lists beforehand, which I don't always do before gigs, but sometimes I like to kind of know, and sometimes I like to be kept in the dark. I think they probably have played this in most of the other gigs that they've done for this tour, but I think I just forgot that it was in the set list, so it was a nice surprise because it was one that I was hoping they'd play, even if I didn't think they were going to play it. And they had some really nice lighting and stuff going on for this one, with Tom kind of describing the story of how the song was made before they played it, which I'd heard before because they talked about it in the pubcast, but it was a nice little kind of atmospheric kind of thing to do before the song. We then get into If You Think This Is Real Life, which is probably my favourite song. Actually, no, it's not my favourite song from Foolish Living Spaces. That's Sunday Was a Friend of Mine. But If You Think This Is Real Life is one of the best songs from Foolish Living Spaces, and it's a great one for them to perform live, so I loved that one. They then played Mothers from the new album, which is one of the ones that I didn't care as much about seeing live, but it was still nice to see, and Tom dedicated the song to any mothers in the room. We then got The Keeper from Foolish Living Spaces, which they did like a nice little extended kind of intro for this song, and they did it for a few other songs as well. I can't remember specifically all of the songs they did it for, but that was a nice little touch that I can't remember if they'd done in the past. I think they had done it when I'd seen them in the past. Then that went into Care For, which is the only song from Ribbon Around the Bomb that was played in this set, which for me personally I appreciated because, like I said, I'm not a big fan of that album, but I do like Care For, and Care For is one that I'd also seen them perform live at Leeds because that was just before Ribbon Around the Bomb came out, and I think Care For was the only single off of that had come out at that point, so it was a nice one to see live. They then played Honey Sweet, which I loved because Honey Sweet I think is probably my favourite Blossom song, or it's at least one of my favourite early Blossom songs because, like I said, I love Foolish Living Spaces, so there's probably a few songs in there that kind of top it a little bit, and they had some really nice kind of honey coloured like lighting and honeycomb vibes with the lighting for that song, which was really nice. Then we get on to Nightclub, which I wasn't too excited for because I do like that song from the new album, but it's not one of my favourites, and I didn't even necessarily know if they were playing it, if it was on the set. I couldn't really remember, but I was actually pleasantly surprised by their song live because they had a whole little pre-recorded sort of skit with like a phone ringing out and stuff like that before, with Tom pretending to call up Leadmill. It's probably the most famous club in Sheffield, so that was nice. I'm sure he changes obviously which club it is for every night he has to like the most popular club in that city and stuff, but that was a nice little touch. They had a purple neon sign that said Nightclub on it that came up when all the lighting was down, and then the main lighting of the actual kind of song that was on during the song was purple as well. It gets even better than that. They did more than that for this song as well. They had a whole kind of choreographed section of them kind of all walking around like stage and stuff like that, kind of in single file as if they were lining up to get into a nightclub and stuff like that, which also meant that Joe, who plays the drums, instead of being at the back in his drum kit, he was kind of walking around with kind of like a drum kit over his shoulders and stuff like that, like a marching band drum kit, which was a really nice touch. And we had Miles doing a similar thing with his like guitar walking around, which was a really fun and nice touch. Then we had I Like Your Look, which was actually quite good live. I did mention in my ranking that it wasn't one of my favourite songs off the album because it sounds very different to the rest of the songs from the new album, but it was still very good live, and I have kind of warmed to that song a little bit more over time. But my girlfriend loves this song, so she was having a great time when they played this song live, and that was really nice, even if I don't particularly love it as much as she does. And then they finish off kind of the main set with At Most a Kiss, which is another great song from the first album, one of the most popular songs, so it's a great way to finish off the main set. And then we get onto the encore. It was kind of less of like a normal encore because there wasn't too much of a kind of whole thing of them going off and kind of staying off stage for a couple minutes. They kind of went off stage, the lights went dark, and then it wasn't too long after that they started having this police siren ringing out over the speaker system and stuff like that, and they had some kind of police red and blue lights flicking on as they brought on the big statue of Gary the Gorilla, which was a really nice touch because I thought that they were going to bring out Gary, but I couldn't remember if they were literally actually going to be taking around the whole big gorilla statue with them or not, or if that wasn't going to be possible. So as soon as I got there and they first came on stage and I didn't see him like in the background or anything, I assumed they just weren't going to do it. But this was a nice touch to not have him there the whole time and to kind of bring him out for the encore as they played Gary live, which was a really fun time. And Gary is one of my favourite songs off the album, Gary, so I had a really fun time with that as well. Then they slowed it down a bit again to one of my, I think it would be one of my favourite songs off the first album. I think it's off the first album. Maybe it's the second one and I might be remembering wrong. I don't know if I mentioned it as being one of my favourite songs when I did my album ranking. I really appreciate when they play this one live because it is a very nice slow one to do live, and they always do a little bit where it kind of leads into the song You're Gorgeous as well. I should also mention at this point as well, because I can't remember exactly when they do it, but they have some nice little bridge kind of moments, some little jams in between the songs during this tour, which for me personally, and I'm sure other bands do it a lot as well, but it very much reminded me of what Arctic Monkeys have been doing with their live shows since Tranquility Base. Mostly with Tranquility Base, they introduced these little jams in between the songs. I think with Arctic Monkeys they had one, they definitely have one that's in in between, I believe it's Tranquility Base and 505, and it's called like Contact or the Jam of Boston or something like that. I think it's had a couple of different names. And one of the ones they did, I can't remember which songs it was in between, but one of the ones they did during this live performance, during this particular gig, definitely reminded me a lot of that particular jam that Arctic Monkeys did during their Tranquility Base and the Car Tour, which was really nice. I mean, it does kind of, to me, knowing obviously and being a big fan of Arctic Monkeys, that they're kind of taking it from that and they've taken some inspiration from that. But it was also still very cool to see, and I like that they've been incorporating that into their gigs as well. Then we get into the last two songs, basically their two most popular songs, at least from their first couple of albums, with There's a Reason Why and Charlemagne, which I like these songs, particularly There's a Reason Why. I do love There's a Reason Why, and it's nice to be performed live. I don't love Charlemagne as much as everybody else, and it's probably partially me just kind of trying to be against the grain and not picking an obvious choice or whatever, but it's also probably just because of how many times I've heard Charlemagne before. I've kind of just become kind of, I don't know if immune is the right word, but you know what I mean. It's kind of, I don't have as much of a reaction to it anymore, and I was worried because it's their biggest song. I was thinking a lot of people were going to go quite crazy for it, which they've done in the past when I've seen them live, which a lot of times I don't normally have a problem with, especially if I'm in the mood for kind of getting involved in the crowd and stuff like that. But for this particular gig, I kind of was just enjoying kind of standing there and just kind of singing along to it and stuff. So I was worried that I was going to suddenly start getting pushed around for this last song. But luckily, the crowd weren't too crazy with this one. I'm sure for other people that were probably quite a bit of a disappointment, and probably for the band themselves, they probably would have liked to have seen more of a reaction to this song, and maybe it was a bit more like that at the front. But for me personally, I was happy with that because I kind of, for some reason, wasn't really in the mood for getting that involved in this particular song. And they always kind of extend Charlemagne for quite a while as well. Well, to begin with, they have another kind of extended intro before this song, which is quite cool. And then they play the whole song, and then Tom introduces every member of the band, including the touring members, which was a nice moment. And then they kind of do like the final like chorus and bridge or whatever of the song again before they finish. And it's the obvious way to end the show, and it's a very nice way to end the show. It's just that Charlemagne's not one of those songs that I'm particularly bothered about personally. So that was the whole gig, and it was a really great gig. I had a really great time with it. I'm definitely going to go see Blossoms again. Like, this is the third time I've seen them, and it's not going to be the last. But as much as I had a great time at this gig, I do personally think I had a much better time at their Foolish Living Spaces tour, at that gig in Nottingham. I think that's still my favourite Blossoms gig that I've seen, and I also have that emotional attachment to seeing them at Leeds Fest as well, with lockdown being over and it being one of the first gigs back from lockdown after the last gig before lockdown was me also seeing Blossoms. So I definitely have more of an emotional attachment to the previous two gigs that I've seen Blossoms at, but I had a great time at this gig, and I think it was a better gig experience than when I actually saw them at Leeds. It's just that I had that emotional attachment to it there. And they did a few new things at this gig as well that I really appreciated, particularly like the choreography for some of the particular songs, and I loved a lot of the jam sessions in between the songs and the bridges and the extended intros and outros and stuff like that. So they've definitely kind of upped everything a lot and increased kind of the production values, I guess you could say, of this particular gig in a way that's very noticeable and that I appreciated. And I should also mention as well kind of the, I guess, set design, I guess you could say, of this gig. I really like what they're doing with the kind of orange drapes they have, or the brown drapes that they have behind them that go over the stage and stuff like that, that's reminiscent of the album cover. I think that is a nice touch that they've added there, and I think it looks great. Again, for some reason for me, it is very reminiscent of kind of a lot of the set design or whatever of Arctic Monkeys Tranquility Base kind of era stuff as well, because it's that very 70s vibe, which is a kind of vibe that I really like, an aesthetic that I really gel with. But they also had a very nice kind of stage set design as well in their Foolish Living Spaces tour, where they had the kind of lights in the background that were reminiscent of those kind of, I think it's like hexagon lights that they had on the album cover, where they took a picture at the, I believe it's like a train station or subway station in New York. So they've always been very good at this kind of set design, at least that when I've seen them during their gigs. So I really appreciate that, and it's an extra effort that they've gone through to kind of make this and sell this better than it could have been. And as well with this particular gig as well, bringing out the big fiberglass Gary gorilla as well was a really nice touch. So that's my thoughts on the gig itself. We left pretty quickly and didn't wait around because, you know, most gigs there's not a chance of seeing the band and stuff like that. I was there with my girlfriend, my brother and his girlfriend. As well as that, my brother's girlfriend's sister was also there, but she was at the front the whole time, so we didn't see her until the end. But she stuck around afterwards and actually managed to meet some of the band members. She got a video off of Miles, and she also got a video off of Joe, the drummer, which those two are two of my favorite band members, particularly Joe, and Miles is just like so funny as well, so I really like him as well. But it's also my birthday in a couple of days, and she got Joe to record a video message for me me and my twin brother for our birthday that's coming up in a couple of days, which was a really nice thing for us to do. And so I've now got a video on my camera roll of Joe Donovan from Blossoms saying happy birthday to me and my twin brother, which is really nice, and I'll play that here.
Hello, Oliver and Joey. Fucking hell, shouldn't do that after a few stellars. Hello, Oliver and Joey, happy birthday. Twin it up, have a great day, enjoy.
So that's my review of this Blossoms gig that I went to last night at the time of recording. So that will have been October 21st. The day that I'm recording this is October 22nd. And I actually have another gig tonight at the exact same venue for Softplay, who were previously known as Slaves, a band that I've been wanting to see for a while. I actually got tickets to see them a few years ago, and then the tour actually ended up being cancelled, so I didn't actually get to see them. So I've been meaning to see Softplay for a while now. So I'm very excited to go and see them as well tonight. I might do another one of these videos at some point in the next week or so, reviewing that gig as well, if I think there's enough to talk about, if there's anything that I want to talk about with that gig. And like I said at the start of this video, let me know if you'd be interested in seeing any more of these videos in the future. I will also do some more album rankings as well, like I mentioned in the last video, for like Idols and Arctic Monkeys and stuff like that. But if you're watching this, I'm assuming you're interested in Blossoms, and if you've not already seen my album ranking for every Blossoms album, I'll make sure to have that on screen now. Oh, as well, one thing I quickly forgot to mention before Blossoms came on, I think it was in between the support band and Blossoms coming on, I also went to the merch stand and got a Blossoms t-shirt, which I'm wearing right now, but I've realized you're not able to see that and I forgot to mention it, so I'm going to show you that right now. There it is.